Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the absolute most baffling neurological mysteries out there, Maladaptive syndrome, or MdDS for short. You know, for vestibular professionals, this condition often catches them completely off guard. And for the patients actually living with it, well, it's a deeply disorienting reality. We're going to break down exactly what is happening inside the brain to cause this whole shebang. And as you'll see, it's actually not quite as random as it first appears.
To really wrap our heads around why this condition is just so perplexing, we have to look at its central paradox. Think about it. What if sitting down actually made your dizziness worse? Normally, if someone has a classic vestibular issue, they're feeling dizzy, maybe lightheaded or unstable, our common sense advice is super simple, right? We say, sit down, rest, take a load off. But for an individual suffering from MdDS, whether it was triggered by a boat ride or just popped up out of nowhere, that standard clinical logic is flipped completely on its head. For these patients, sitting at a desk or lying completely flat in bed actually makes that intense sensation of rocking, bobbing, and swaying feel infinitely worse. Crazy, right? So why in the world does resting trigger the absolute worst symptoms? Well, to understand this flipped clinical logic, we literally have to look past the peripheral inner ear. The standard structural plumbing of the ear, usually it's totally fine. Instead, we need to peer directly into the brain's deep subcortical spatial networks. By examining these automatic processing centers of the brain, we can finally unlock exactly why these patients experience such bizarre sensations. We're talking about feeling like the ground is a literal trampoline, or like gravity is this invisible hand just dragging them sideways. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what's going wrong, but first we need to look at how our brains normally process balance. In a healthy, happy nervous system, your upright postural control relies on this beautifully coordinated division of labor between two distinct sensory modes. First up, you have the stabilizers. These are your silent background anchors. Think proprioception, the sensory input from the soles of your feet, and your baseline vestibular tone. They keep you aligned against gravity totally automatically, without you ever having to spare a single thought for it. On the flip side, we have the navigators. These are your active systems, like active vision and dynamic vestibular tracking, and they kick into gear when you're actively moving through and mapping a changing environment. But here is where the entire system completely breaks down for someone with MdS. Their internal, subcortical baseline. It becomes entirely disrupted. The central nervous system literally loses its ability to identify a true zero point. That silent, automatic subcortical anchor we just talked about, the stabilizers, it's just gone. The brain suddenly has absolutely no idea where center even is. Let's move to the chronological breakdown and see how this builds into a full-blown sensory crisis. It's basically a four-step chain reaction. Step 1, that internal baseline gets disrupted. The brain suddenly realizes, uh-oh, I've lost my anchor. So moving to step 2, in a desperate attempt to prevent a fall, the brain rapidly adopts a maladaptive strategy. In step 3, it forces the lower limbs to completely shift roles. It strips your feet of their background stabilizer job and forces them to become an active, high-alert navigator. The patient starts hyper-analyzing every single square inch of the floor beneath them, using the pressure sensors in their feet to actively calculate where the earth is. And finally, step 4, because the legs are now aggressively navigating stability instead of just silently holding posture, the entire central nervous system becomes absolutely flooded with sensory noise. And that massive flood of noise leads directly to a genuinely terrifying reality for the patient. They often describe this as feeling as though they are walking on a trampoline, a mattress, or squishy mud. When the brain tries to interpret this hyper-vigilant sensory data dump from the feet, it simply cannot process it as a solid, normal floor anymore. It perceives a shifting, totally unstable surface. So that hyper-analysis literally creates the physical illusion of a squishy, bouncing ground beneath them.
But honestly, the squishy ground is only half the battle here. Let's shift gears to the second profound symptom these patients face, what's often ominously called the invisible hand. This is the horrifying, relentless sensation of an unyielding gravitational pull. Patients will tell you they feel as though they're being dragged heavily to one side or pulled aggressively downwards straight into the floor, even when they're standing perfectly straight. There is no physical force there, yet they feel it constantly.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we find the second culprit hidden deep in the brain, the velocity storage integrator. This is a highly specialized network of neurons tucked way down in the vestibular nuclei and the vestibulocerebellum. You could think of it essentially like a storage tank for motion signals. In a healthy brain, it grabs onto low-frequency vestibular inputs and lets them decay nice and slowly. which is what allows you to accurately perceive sustained, continuous motion. But in MdDS, this storage tank gets totally trapped in a continuous, phantom loop of motion. It's constantly charging and discharging an internal velocity signal from movement that just isn't happening in the real world.
So the crucial point is the massive subcortical clash this creates. It's like a tug of war inside the brain. On one side, you have your otolith organs in your inner ear, the utricle and saccule. They are functioning perfectly, sending an accurate, healthy signal to the brain saying, hey, we're stationary and gravity is acting straight down at 1g. But on the exact opposite side, you have that velocity storage integrator continuously broadcasting a corrupted, noisy signal, loudly insisting that the body is actively rotating, tilting, or moving through space.
When the brain is forced to integrate these two totally incompatible sets of data, it faces an impossible choice. So what does it do? Well, it compromises. It does this by recalculating verticality. To account for both the true vertical force of gravity coming from the ear and that phantom velocity signal blasting from the storage integrator, the brain creates a brand new blended internal model. And this sensory mismatch is exactly what convinces the patient that gravity is physically pulling them off axis. Their brain has, quite literally, drawn a new, tilted map of gravity.
Understanding all of these underlying mechanics gives us the ultimate blueprint for rehabilitation, and it explains perfectly why your standard vestibular exercises so often fail these patients. You see, standard exercises are designed to push the vestibular system, but for an MdS patient whose brain is already drowning in hyper-vigilant noise, adding more stimulation, that just introduces way more chaos. Clinicians absolutely cannot treat this population by pushing them harder. Instead, they have to target and calm these faulty neural networks directly. The entire goal of rehab has to be dialing back that corrupted velocity storage loop and helping the patient regain their silent, stable anchor.
I absolutely have to highlight this perspective because it completely reframes the entire syndrome. To quote, "These symptoms are not random occurrences. They are highly logical subcortical adaptations." That is a total game changer. The MdS brain isn't just broken or randomly malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what it was programmed to do when it loses its vertical reference frame. It recruits the lower limbs to survive what it genuinely believes is an unstable world, and it recalculates gravity to make sense of the conflicting data. It is a highly logical adaptation. It's just built on a foundation of corrupted data. Which leaves us with this final lingering thought. How much of your perceived reality is really just your brain's best guess at navigating gravity? When we step back and look at Maladaptive syndrome, we're just forced to marvel at the fragile, invisible, and entirely automatic calculations that are happening deep in our subcortical networks every single second, just to keep us tethered to the earth. If those calculations shift even a tiny fraction, our entire reality shifts right along with it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you.